Alright, so the live action remake of Disney's Snow White has officially been released, and it is bombing at the box office. Now, when I go on the internet, pretty much all the conversation that I see is about the Rachel Zegler controversies, and pretty much everybody is blaming Rachel Zegler for the failure of this movie. She is being thrown under the proverbial bus. There is this article in Variety that's called Inside Disney's Snow White Fiasco. You would think that it would be a holistic view of the situation, but no, it's just a bunch of Rachel Zegler stuff. There's like one paragraph where they talk about some other factors that isn't Rachel Zegler related. Now, this article, or should we say hit piece, is so unhinged that it goes so far as to blame Rachel Zegler, who on a post related to Snow White said free Palestine. It went so far as to blame Rachel Zegler for Gal Gadot getting death threats. We cannot operate like this as a society where if you express your perspective on one side of the Israel-Palestine situation, now means that you support or endorse or are to blame for people on the other side of the situation getting death threats. Like, what are we even doing here? Now, there was another point in the article where it mentions that one of the film's producers flew to New York to speak directly with Rachel Zegler regarding that post. And then because of that, a bunch of Rachel Zegler fans started calling that guy creepy and saying like, ugh, why are you flying out to meet her? Now, I think it's totally reasonable for a producer to want to speak to one of his actresses in person. That being said, that producer's son responded on social media and it was pretty soy.
You really want to do this? Yeah, my dad, the producer of an enormous piece of Disney IP with hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, had to leave his family to fly across the country to reprimand his 20-year-old employee for dragging her personal politics into the middle of promoting the movie for which he signed a multi-million-dollar contract to get paid and do publicity for.
Now, to be fair, yes, this does come off as very whiny, but I mean, yeah, I don't necessarily think that he's wrong, right? Like, there's just nothing like weird or bad about a producer wanting to rein in an actress that is trying to attach their personal politics to the promotion of a movie. He continues, he says,
This is called adult responsibility and accountability, and her actions clearly hurt the film's box office. Free speech does not mean that you're allowed to say whatever you want in your private employment without repercussions. Tens of thousands of people worked on that film, and she hijacked the conversation for her own immature desires at the risk of all the colleagues and crew and blue-collar workers who depend on that movie to be successful. Narcissism is not something to be coddled or encouraged.
Yes, because Disney cares so much about their crew workers, right? That's why they fired a bunch of animators before Inside Out 2 came out, so that they wouldn't have to pay them bonuses if the movie was successful. Disney and its producers really care about their workers. So on that front, shut up. But you know what? I like one part of that paragraph, and it's where he talks about adult accountability. Because listen, we can sit here and chastise Rachel Zegler all day. I can agree that a lot of the stuff that she said was just kind of irresponsible when she is the lead of a massive blockbuster film. However, to sit here and act like Rachel Zegler is completely or even mostly to blame for the movie bombing at the box office, I think is pretty silly. And today I want to hold the adults in this situation accountable for their actions because there are plenty of reasons why this movie bombed. And quite frankly, I don't even think that Rachel Zegler was the biggest factor at play here. The first thing that needs to be brought up is that I don't think that Snow White is a super hot IP in 2025. However, for some godforsaken reason, the geniuses over at Disney thought it would be a good idea to give this movie a $270 million budget. And you know, it would be one thing if this movie's production value was like so incredibly high and artistic integrity was a thing that Disney cared about, and there was just an artist that was super passionate about it, and they were like, you know what, we'll take a chance on you, kid, we'll give you all this money. But no, I do not understand where the $270 million went. The reality is that The live action remakes that have made over $1 billion, which would justify a $270 million budgets, are all remakes of movies that came out in like the 90s. Movies like The Lion King and Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast that actually managed to gross over $1 billion are movies where the kids that grew up with them feel nostalgia for them. Now they're adults with kids of their own, and so families en masse are going to be going to the theater. And so movies like Snow White, which came out in like 1937, and movies like Dumbo, which came out shortly thereafter, just simply don't have the same IP recognition, nor nostalgia felt by a bunch of people with kids. And Dumbo, which, to be clear, came out in the same year, 2019, that The Lion King grossed over $1 billion, only grossed like $353 million. So the reality is that these morons pretty much doomed this movie from the start because they spent an unreasonable amount of money on it, which puts an unreasonable set of expectations on it. And that has nothing to do with Rachel Zegler. Now, to be fair, we can look at an example like Cinderella, which is also a remake of an older Disney animated film, and that actually did manage to be, more of a modest success, but a success nonetheless. However, Cinderella only made like $500 million, and the big kicker is that it only had a budget of $95 million. If Cinderella had cost $270 million, it also would have flopped. But another advantage that Cinderella had was it was one of the first live-action Disney remakes. So there was actually kind of a novelty to it. People were inherently interested to see what that would look like. A live-action Disney remake in 2025 is not only not novel, but kind of nauseating. And the other thing that Cinderella had going for it was that it was actually a solid film, unlike the new Snow White movie. And on that note, let's actually look at one of the controversial things that Rachel Zegler said.
I mean, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
So no Prince?
What is one of the key words that she mentions in all of that? The word we, as in Rachel Zegler is not just speaking for herself. Rachel Zegler didn't write the movie. Rachel Zegler didn't produce the movie. Rachel Zegler is ultimately not in charge in deciding what the movie was going to be about. This was the culture. This was the philosophy surrounding making the original version of Snow White that all of Disney greenlit, supported, and wanted to make. Clearly, the movie was reshot in a pretty significant way because in interviews, Gal Gadot and Rachel Zegler were talking about how Snow White was not going to be saved by the prince.
And we absolutely wrote a Snow White that
She's
is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
And spoiler alert, Snow White does indeed get saved by the prince in the movie. And quite frankly, you can tell that the movie was reshot when watching it. It feels like a weird Frankenstein's monster of a movie with a bunch of scenes jumbled together, paced really weirdly. You have horrific Polar Express looking ass CGI dwarves. And then you have this group of bandits that actually includes a little person in it. So you're willing to have one live action little person, but you felt the need to include CGI dwarves. It doesn't make any sense. And again, my point here is that Disney made a bad movie. Instead of sticking with their original vision, which may or may not have been bad, but it at least could have had some artistic merit, they decided to water down their movie into this pathetic thing that's trying to appease everybody, but is clearly appeasing nobody. Because they made a shitty movie that is not getting good word of mouth, so it's not going to have good legs at the box office. And Disney, have you appeased all the naysayers that were calling it woke, that were launching these weird campaigns to boycott it? No, those people are never going to be on your side. The least you could have done was maybe stuck to your original vision and at least made a decent movie out of it. But Disney has had a history of doing this in the past. I actually made a video like 5 months ago where Disney was trying to blame the failure of that Lightyear movie on the fact that there was a lesbian kiss in it. These wealthy producers and executives in Hollywood will never look inward. They'll never acknowledge that they might be the problem. They will never acknowledge that they just made a shitty movie. They'll never acknowledge that they are spineless cowards that can't just have an artistic vision and make art that people can maybe potentially connect with. They'll look for anybody else to blame, whether it be gay people in the case of Lightyear, or an admittedly controversial actress in Rachel Zegler. Because here's the thing, it is ultimately hard to measure how much these culture war conversations ultimately affect the end decision of somebody deciding whether to consume a piece of media or not. Now, this isn't an apples to apples comparison because it's a video game versus a movie, but I would argue that the video game version of Snow White for the past few years has been Assassin's Creed Shadows, which is a video game set in feudal Japan where one of the main characters, as you saw there, is a black guy that becomes a samurai. And all of the parties that you would imagine would be upset about that were upset about that. And much like Snow White, there were marketing mishaps. Honestly, I might make a separate video just talking about the situation, but it even got to the point where the Japanese government was commenting about how offensive the game was. And just like Snow White, there was this massive campaign to try to boycott the game. Anyways, in the same week that Snow White came out, Assassin's Creed Shadows was released. And it had the second highest day one sales revenue from the Assassin's Creed franchise. So when I look at a situation like that, it does kind of just reinforce my instinct that I think most people aren't that concerned with culture war stuff and are ultimately more concerned with just watching things that appeal to them. Word of mouth, right? If you hear something is good, that'll make you more likely to watch it. Because again, if these culture war movements were truly able to tank movies and games, Assassin's Creed Shadows definitely would have been one to flop. And when I look at the situation with Snow White, there are so many other factors, as I've described in this video, that I think it's disingenuous to hyper-focus on Rachel Zegler. Is it okay to criticize her? Of course it is. At the end of the day, criticizing the original thing when you're making a remake of it is just silly, right? Making a MAGA post where you're telling Trump supporters that you hope they never know peace is just not a smart thing to do because you want those MAGA supporters to buy tickets to your movie. But please, for the love of God, do not let Disney get away with skirting away and acting like at the end of the day, they weren't mostly responsible for the bad decisions that had to do with this movie. So let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.